Scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, you probably have noticed at supermarkets, in the groceries that you buy, that there has been this trend over the last number of years to start putting a best before date on everything, even things that don't need it. It's considered by a lot of folks to be sort of a scam, that what they're trying to do is convince you that something has expired that doesn't expire so that you throw it away and buy more. Okay, see, so one of my favorites actually is this. This is a picture of a box from my own shelf. Salt, box of salt, Best Buy, 2029. Now here's the thing, if you look it up, like iodized salt, yeah, the iodine can fade in strength over time, and some salt has like anti-caking agents that can degrade over time. Kosher salt has neither of these things. Kosher salt is just pure salt. I mean, so the reality is that this Best Buy date is kind of ridiculous because if you store it in a dry place, this salt will be good when Jesus returns, okay? I mean, there's nothing that's going to happen to this salt. But salt is a metaphor that Jesus uses because it has been so important for ages. In fact, your fun fact of the day, because we never want you to leave here thinking you learned nothing, your fun fact of the day is that the word salary comes from a Latin word salarium, which referred to a Roman soldier's monthly pay in salt. Now, they weren't actually given salt. Like parents, I can try this with your kids. Here's your allowance. Here's your allowance, son, daughter. Give them a canister of Morton's. They weren't actually paid in salt. They were paid an amount of money that would allow them to buy a month's supply of salt because it was so important. So your salarium was an amount of money to buy the amount of salt that you needed. So this is completely useless fact. Good only if you join us on trivia night sometime, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, we had so many people for the last trivia night, they split us into two teams, and we got first and second. And so, none of the questions being about the origin of the word salary, however. But it's your fun fact of the day. But it is a reflection of how important salt was. And so Jesus uses this metaphor where he talks about this idea of salt losing its taste. And I always remind people of the historical fact whenever we talk about this passage or this saying of Jesus, whenever it appears in the Bible. In ancient times, salt was mined. All right, and because it was mined, it was impure, so it was contaminated with other minerals. In fact, most salt in its time was not white. It was so contaminated with minerals, it would be like brownish. To the extent that when pure salt started being sold, there were people who were confused because they were not used to seeing salt that was white. They didn't actually understand that as the appropriate color. And so what would happen is that you would store this mixture that was actually salt combined with minerals from the earth, pretty harmless minerals, but minerals nonetheless. And as it was stored in a non-airtight container in a humid climate, the moisture would cause the salt to leach out, and all you would have left is the useless mineral component of the mixture. And that's how salt could lose its taste, because we understand that box of kosher salt on my shelf 5 years from now, it's still going to be salty. Okay, nothing will have changed. But the reason why this is a metaphor that Jesus uses is that this idea of having this salt/mineral mixture where the saltiness has leached away is really a description of something that can happen to us. And I really wonder, if we think about our own lives and what's happened, to us over the years, what essential qualities have leached out of your life? Because at some point in your life, you may have felt that, you were full of idealism, you were full of values, you were full of ambition, you were full of all of these kinds of things within you, and sometimes that just starts to leach away. And ultimately you start feeling maybe a little empty inside. Or you start feeling like maybe you've lost that sense of meaning and purpose that you once had, or a sense of drive. Maybe you've made too many compromises in your life, and it leaves you feeling like you've become a little bit of an empty shell, like that mineral residue from which the salt had actually leached away. That can happen to all of us. And it can happen in the way it happens to salt, which is not visibly, not suddenly, but slowly over time. And when it finally happens, it makes us feel like we're useless. And so Jesus talks about that. What happens when salt has lost its taste? It's no longer good for anything. But unlike salt, where the flavor couldn't be restored, there's hope for us. So that when those things have been draining away from us, that inner energy, that inner idealism that you may have carried within you for a long time, or when you were younger, that may have left you, but you can get it back. But one of the ways in which it leaves us is actually like that salt. It leaves us when we're doing nothing about it. Because one of the realities is that when we coast, we usually decline. I mean, this happens in so many ways in life. When we just start to coast, we start to decline. If we aren't actively working at maintaining those things that are important to us, we start to lose them. Right? If we aren't actively working on developing, on staying focused on those things that matter. Because we all know this is true, for example, in relationships. If your relationship coasts, it will decline. You have to actively work at it. You have to actively put energy into it. And if you don't keep putting energy into it actively, it will start to fade. The same is true of everything else. The ideals that we have, we can be really idealistic. As younger people, we can be really idealistic and energetic. And if we start to just coast, it starts to fade, and we lose that. If we start allowing the pressures of the world to act on us and convince us to not be as vocal as we used to be, or to not be as active in fighting for justice as we used to be, then it will start to decline. And one of the ways we understand that the decline is happening is in the way we relate to others. And so Jesus shifts his metaphor very quickly from salt to light. And he says this, that no one after lighting a lamp puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, so it gives light to all. See, the light that doesn't shine, the light that's hidden under a basket is useless, and people start to notice it. It's the same thing with ourselves. When we hold certain values, when we hold certain ideals, and we just stop working at it, we stop expressing it, then what happens is it just starts to fade. And the light that doesn't shine is noticed by everyone for its absence. So one of the ways that we might be spotting what has been working on us negatively inside is whether we realize that our externals have grown inconsistent with our internals. That's one of the warning signs that we feel. When you start feeling like a fraud, and you start feeling like you're not living up to what you had once proclaimed to be what you're about, you understand something has gone wrong inside. And usually the way we react to that, the way we can sense it in ourselves, is when we start becoming defensive about it. When we start becoming guarded. When we start acting like we're afraid to be discovered as no longer being the person that we thought we were. No longer being the person who really stands for the things that we once claimed to believe in. Who no longer fights for justice when we say that we are people who believe in justice. Who no longer fight for the rights of others when we say we are people who believe in those rights. And we start wondering if anyone else has noticed that we're no longer the people that we once were. That we're no longer maybe as good of a parent or as good of a partner or as good of an employee as we used to be. And the external is actually one of the ways in which we can counter this. See, Jesus tells us pretty clearly, he says, look, let your light shine. Be bolder. Instead of being more timid, instead of being more quiet, let your light shine. Be more out front about these things that you're about. And that's one of the ways in which we re-energize ourselves, is by actually being bolder. Now, this can rub us the wrong way, because sometimes this feels like bragging. It feels like, oh, I'm not supposed to be bold about what I believe in. I'm not supposed to be bold about about my stances. I shouldn't be bold, because it feels like it's bragging. But that actually stems from a misunderstanding of what humility is about in Scripture. When the Bible uses the word that gets translated as humility, it's this super long Greek word, tapeinosphrosyne, which refers to an inside-out virtue. It's an inner virtue that starts by comparing ourselves to God. Humility in the Bible is understanding that we're not God. I mean, that's an essential piece of humility, right? We all understand we're not God. Okay. But while it's about comparison, all right, it's about avoiding comparison, there are two ways in which comparison can be lived into. Yes, we are supposed to understand that we are not as good as God. So that's the first piece of humility. The second piece of humility is seeing the good in others. Okay? But you can see the good in others without degrading yourself. See, that's the ideal. Humility is not about tearing yourself down. The ideal of humility is about lifting up what else you see. The ideal of humility is saying, yes, God is great. God is perfect. God is the ideal. And then humility with regard to people is not about tearing yourself down. It's about looking at the other people around you and seeing their greatness, seeing how wonderful they are. It's about looking at the person next to you, the person around you, the person you meet, and saying, oh, what a wonderful person they are. Look at the good things they do. Look at their amazing qualities that they bring. This is what humility is. Humility is about not looking down upon them, but it's also about not looking down on yourself. It's really just about appreciating God for the greatness of God, and then appreciating others for the greatness that they possess, the qualities that they bring. All right? But it's not about short shrifting yourself. It's like the great baseball player Dizzy Dean is said to have initiated this quote: "It ain't bragging if you can do it." Right? It ain't bragging if you can do it. Right? Like tonight, the team that wins the Super Bowl, they're going to celebrate. And they deserve it, because they will have won the Super Bowl. Okay? It's not bragging if you can do it. All right? And so, humility is a good thing when it limits our looking down upon others, because that's not what it's supposed to be about. Humility is supposed to be about us seeing the greatness of God and seeing how wonderful other people are. But it's a false humility or a negative humility or a destructive humility when you interpret humility as being a call to look upon yourself as less. That is not what humility is supposed to do. We should not ever allow humility to be a driver in lessening our self-confidence. It ain't bragging if you can do it. And you know what? You can do it. Because bad humility is when you tell yourself, I'm not as good as them. I can't do it. No. You can appreciate and applaud how good others are. You can appreciate how incredible God is, but not tear yourself down in the process. Don't use humility as an excuse to trap yourself in a mindset that ends up causing a lack of self-confidence. Because that is not what Jesus expects of his disciples. What he says next in this passage is his next teaching. He says, look, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees. And the scribes and Pharisees, of course, were the persons who they would have been raised from birth to believe are the experts in the law. They're the ones who know how you're supposed to be. And he tells them, no, you've got to have righteousness that exceeds theirs. Why? Well, for one thing, experts in the law are typically good at one thing. They're good at telling you about not breaking the law. That's what they're good at, okay? They're good at telling you how not to break the law, and that is not the goal. I mean, it is a goal, but it's not the goal, all right? The goal of righteousness is not to be one who can go through life and simply not violate the law. That is too low of a standard. I'm pretty sure, I mean, I can't guarantee it, I'm pretty sure none of you murdered anyone this morning. Pretty sure. Don't raise your hand if you did. That is a start, but that's not righteousness. All right? It's like, yeah, good for you, good for us. We didn't murder anyone this morning. Of course, I haven't been to the ShopRite yet and fought through the parking lot, so the day is young. But still, okay, that's not enough. Okay? You didn't rob a bank this morning? Good, you didn't violate the law, but it's not enough. All right? Experts in the law are experts in telling you how not to break the law, but that is not what righteousness is. And so Jesus is saying your righteousness needs to expand. It needs to exceed. It needs to be greater than simply the righteousness of those who are experts in teaching you how not to break the law, because not breaking the law is simply a floor for your behavior. It's not a ceiling that you strive for. It is not a goal that you get to, okay? Because I'm telling you, for instance, my mother, who's gone to be with the Lord, she never got a ticket in her life. She was a terrible driver. I mean, just terrible. True story, she didn't get her driver's license till she was in her 40s. And I was a young kid, and my dad, they took my mom. In Illinois, when you get your driver's license, it's not an on-road test, it's off-road on a test track, okay? So my dad said, after work, I'm taking your mom to get her driver's license. They call me from there that they're going to be late because our car was being towed. My mother on the test track managed to run the car over a curb and get it wedged on the curb so that they had to call a tow truck to get their car off of it. A week later, she went back for the retest and got her license. Okay? She never got a ticket. She was terrible at driving. Right? A lot of people can be terrible Christians without breaking a law. They just don't do anything positive. They just don't do anything that really matters. They just don't fight for justice. They just don't fight for righteousness. They just don't do anything actively to help their neighbors in need. They don't protect others from injustice happening in the world. They don't do any of that. They don't do any of that. They're just good at not breaking a law themselves. Didn't break a law. Were terrible at living into their faith. Same kind of thing. So what Jesus is saying is that what you actually need to do is you can't just settle for the standard of not breaking laws. Your standard has to be that you're going to exceed it. You have to do that which you don't have to do to not break the law. You need to fulfill the law by living into righteousness. And doing this starts with believing that you can. In order to be righteous, you have to strive for greater righteousness all the time. See, righteousness isn't this static state, because if you try to stay static, if you coast, you will decline. If you're satisfied with being as righteous as you were yesterday, you will decline. Because Jesus is right, we are the salt of the world, but the world is moist. And it will eat at us. It will corrode us. It will dissolve us. It will leach the righteousness out from us. But what makes you righteous is a continual commitment to strive for greater righteousness. That's the way in which you get better. Right? This is true. Any of you have exercised regularly? You all know if you don't up the resistance, if you don't up the difficulty, you actually decline. You can't keep the same exercise routine forever. You increase or you actually start to decline. And the same is true of faith. And so what makes us righteous is when we continue to strive. And we continue to strive. We start by remembering to stay in the Word, to stay in prayer, to stay focused on our values, to stay focused on what it is that we truly believe about what God desires for the world, and to continually expect more of ourselves than we did before. Because for people of faith, you do not have a best before date. You have a best after date. And that date is always yesterday. So you strive each day to be your best, better than you had been. And that is righteousness. Amen.